Normandy, June 1944. A single strand of field telephone wire stretched at ankle height across a sunken farm road would stop 57 tons of German armor in under 3 seconds. The engineer's name was Corporal James Mallister, 23 years old, former electrician from Pittsburgh. He carried no anti-tank mines that morning, no bazooka rounds, no explosive charges, just a coil of communications wire and an idea born from desperation. The Tiger, I was already a legend. 57 tons of steel and fury. An 88mm 36 gun that could shred a Sherman at 2,000 meters. Frontal armor, 100mm thick, so impenetrable that Allied tank crews called direct engagement organized suicide. Production began in August 1942. By D-Day, fewer than 1/400 had rolled off German assembly lines. Each one cost the Reich 300,000 man-hours of precision engineering. Germany couldn't afford to lose them. The Allies couldn't afford to face them. The mathematics were brutal. A single Tiger could knock out 5 Shermans before taking a disabling hit. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate the Tiger's glacis at any range. Even the upgraded 76mm required a lucky side shot or rear strike to threaten the armor. Even then, success was uncertain. The Tiger's tracks were 725mm wide. Its Maybach HL-230-45 engine generated 700 horsepower. It could climb a 35-degree slope, ford rivers 1.2 meters deep, and pivot its turret a full 360 degrees in under a minute. But it had a weakness. Every tank did. If you find this kind of forgotten courage as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of defiance and sacrifice deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help ensure they aren't forgotten. The Germans called it the Schachtellaufwerk. The interleaved running gear, the intricate system of overlapping road wheels, drive sprockets, and suspension bars that translated engine power into movement. On the Tiger, this system was a masterpiece of over-engineering and a maintenance curse. 8 overlapping road wheels per side, arranged in a complex pattern, interleaved for weight distribution and ride stability. Brilliant in theory, catastrophic in mud, ice, or mechanical failure. The interleaving wasn't arbitrary. German engineers had calculated the optimal arrangement to perfection. Each wheel bore a precise percentage of the vehicle's total weight. The overlapping pattern distributed stress evenly across the track, reducing ground pressure to 15.3 pounds per square inch, lower than many lighter tanks. It allowed the Tiger to traverse soft ground that would bog down simpler designs. It gave the crew a smoother ride, improving gun accuracy on the move. But the complexity had costs. Each overlapping wheel added friction to the system. More points of contact meant more opportunities for debris to lodge in the mechanism. In the frozen mud of the Eastern Front, the gaps between wheels filled with slush that froze overnight. Tank crews spent hours each morning chipping ice from the running gear with hammers and blowtorches. In Italian dust, grit ground down the rubber tire rings that cushioned each wheel. On the Tiger, changing a single inner road wheel meant removing up to 6 outer wheels first, a 12-hour job under combat conditions. Mallister had seen a Tiger up close exactly once. 4 days after landing at Omaha Beach. His unit, a combat engineer platoon attached to the 29th Infantry Division, had been tasked with clearing roadblocks outside Vierville-sur-Mer. The Tiger had been abandoned, its transmissions shattered by a naval artillery near miss. Mallister had climbed onto the hull, touched the cold armor, studied the tracks, counted the wheels, measured the gaps with his hands. He noticed something the tank's designers might have missed. The overlapping wheels created narrow channels between their edges, tight vertical spaces where the wheels nearly touched but didn't quite. Each gap was perhaps 8 centimeters wide, just enough clearance for the wheels to rotate freely, just narrow enough to trap objects of certain dimensions. A tree branch wedged between two wheels had bent the mounting bracket on one road wheel. A length of barbed wire caught in the drive sprocket had torn 4 track links before the crew had cut it free. Mallister had run his fingers along the track assembly, felt the tension in the system, calculated mentally how much force held everything together. The track itself was under constant stress. Each link carried a portion of the tank's weight. The drive sprocket at the rear pulled the track forward. The idler wheel at the front maintained tension. The 8 road wheels in between supported the load. Compromise any single component, and the system failed. He noticed something else. The bocage country was a maze designed for dying slowly. Fog clung to hedgerows so thick that visibility ended at 20 meters. Mud sucked at boots with every step. Farm roads barely wider than a truck carved narrow channels through walls of earth and vegetation. Perfect killing corridors where a single machine gun could pin down an entire platoon. Mallister's unit had been holding this stretch of nothing for 6 days. Exhausted. Low on everything that mattered. The last anti-tank mine had been used 3 days ago. The bazooka team was dead. Air support was grounded by weather. They had rifles, grenades, and desperation. Sergeant Collins sat with his back against a hedgerow, cigarette hanging from his lips, eyes empty. "We're holding air," he'd said that morning. "Nothing but air." Private Rourke kept checking his rifle, hands shaking. 20 years old, loyal, terrified. Lieutenant Abrams crouched over a map that meant nothing anymore, trying to calculate angles of retreat that didn't exist. Then they heard it. The sound came first as a low rumble, felt in the chest before the ears registered it. Maybach engines. Unmistakable. Every man froze. The forward scout stumbled back, through the hedgerow, wide-eyed. 4 Tigers, column formation, infantry behind them, half a click out. The words hung in the fog like a death sentence. Collins laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. 4 Tigers. Christ, we got nothing that'll scratch paint. Mallister's mind snapped back to Vierville-sur-Mer. Cold armor under his hands, overlapping wheels, narrow gaps. The tension in the track assembly. He looked at the coil of communications wire on his pack. "I think," his voice was barely audible, "I can stop them." Collins stared at Mallister like he'd lost his mind. "Wire? You want to stop a tiger with wire?" "Not stop it directly." Mallister's words came fast, urgent. "The overlapping wheels, the Schachtellaufwerk, they create gaps, narrow channels. If we string a wire at ankle height across the road, the wheels will catch it, pull it into the suspension. The rotation winds it tighter. The torque—" "This is insane," Rourke whispered. "It's physics," Mallister shot back. "The track's under constant tension. 57 tons of stress distributed across 8 wheels per side. Introduce foreign material into the interleaved assembly, and the system can't compensate. The wire doesn't need to break the tank. It just needs to jam the mechanism long enough for the torsion bars to buckle." Lieutenant Abrams studied him. Young, calculating, weighing impossible odds against certain death. "Do it." Mallister grabbed his wire coil. Rourke and a private named Hayes volunteered without speaking. They crawled into the sunken farm road, a mud-slick channel barely 3 meters wide, hedgerows pressing in from both sides. Mallister drove stakes into the soft earth at the road's edges, disguising them with loose vegetation. He strung the wire between them, 18 inches above the ground, pulling it taut. His hands worked fast, precise. Artillery thumped somewhere to the south. The rumble of engines grew louder. Hayes looked at him. "You sure about this?" Mallister's hands were shaking as he tied off the final knot, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of knowing this was their only chance. "No," he said, "but it's all we've got." Oberleutnant Kurt Hoffmann stood in the lead. Tiger's cupola, scanning the hedgerows through binoculars. The road ahead was clear, just another nameless farm lane carved through Norman mud. Intelligence reported minimal Allied presence. Light infantry, no armor, no meaningful resistance. Behind his tank, 3 more Tigers followed in column. Behind them, 2 platoons of panzer grenadiers moved through the hedgerows, ready to exploit the breakthrough. The plan was simple. Punch through the American line, reach the ridge beyond, establish a strong point. Textbook armored assault. The ground trembled under 228 tons of steel. 4 Maybach engines roared in unison, a thundering chorus that announced their arrival like the wrath of gods. The Tigers carved through the bocage, hedgerows splitting and collapsing under their treads. Dust and exhaust hung in the morning air. Hoffmann felt invincible, as he should. A Tiger was worth 10 enemy tanks. 4 Tigers were unstoppable. The lead tank approached the sunken road, narrow, rutted, flanked by earthen walls thick with vegetation. Perfect cover from artillery, perfect approach to the American position, exactly as reconnaissance had predicted. In the hedgerows, Mallister and his platoon lay motionless, breathing shallow. The grinding of tracks grew louder, closer. Steel on steel, the smell of diesel, the earth vibrating under their bodies. Mallister's eyes fixed on the wire, a single thin line stretched across the road, barely visible in the mud and shadow. The Tiger rolled forward. 57 tons, 700 horsepower, 100 millimeters of frontal armor versus 20 feet of communications wire. The nose of the tank reached the wire. The Tiger's lead wheels rolled over the wire. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the loop lifted, caught in the first set of overlapping wheels. The second rotation dragged it deeper. The third pulled it inward, into the narrow channels between the interleaved assemblies where metal nearly touched metal. The wire wound tighter with every rotation, a steel noose cinching around the suspension with the full force of 57 tons behind it. The sound came first. A high-pitched shriek of metal on metal. Then rubber tearing. Then something deeper. Structural, catastrophic. A torsion bar snapping under torque it was never designed to withstand. The Tiger lurched violently to the right, tracks screaming. The entire hull slewed sideways, grinding into the muddy embankment. 57 tons of momentum stopped dead with a shudder that shook the ground. Behind it, the second Tiger's driver slammed the brakes. Steel screeched against steel. The third and fourth tanks halted in rapid succession, compressed into a column on a road barely wide enough for one. No room to maneuver, no room to reverse, no room to escape. The sunken road had become a trap. Inside the lead Tiger, Hoffmann grabbed the cupola rail as his tank died beneath him. Outside, his crew shouted in confusion. Behind him, 3 more crews demanded answers over the radio. In the hedgerows, Collins stared in disbelief. Rourke's mouth hung open. Lieutenant Abrams looked at Mallister like he'd just witnessed a miracle. Mallister exhaled slowly, hands still trembling. It actually worked. The German panzer grenadiers pushed forward through the hedgerows, attempting to support the stalled armor. American artillery answered within seconds. Pre-sighted coordinates, shells screaming in from batteries 2 kilometers back. Explosions tore through the vegetation. Men scattered. Without their tigers leading the advance, without the steel shield they'd counted on, morale shattered like glass. Soldiers dove for cover, retreated through the bocage, disappeared into the morning fog. The attack collapsed before it began. Inside the lead tiger, Hoffman's crew fought rising panic. The engine still ran, but the tracks wouldn't respond. The Maybach overheated, temperature gauges climbing into the red. The driver wrestled with controls that did nothing. The gunner couldn't traverse. The turret's hydraulics relied on forward movement to maintain pressure. Zero visibility through the periscopes, zero communication with the tanks behind them. Zero options. The second Tiger's commander radioed frantically. "What happened? What do we do?" Hoffman had no answer. They couldn't move forward, couldn't reverse on the narrow road without risk of throwing a track, couldn't rotate to bring guns to bear, couldn't even see what had stopped them. Meanwhile, the Americans recovered. Collins was shouting orders, repositioning his squad along the hedgerows. Lieutenant Abrams was on the radio, calling for support. Soldiers clapped Mallister on the shoulder, grinning like madmen. He barely acknowledged them, eyes still fixed on the tigers, calculating next moves, survival odds, escape routes. Then Rourke came running, breathless. "Lieutenant says Shermans are coming up the west flank, 5 minutes out." The Shermans came from the west. 3 M4A1s, moving fast through gaps in the hedgerows. Their commanders already calculating angles. The immobilized tigers were sitting ducks, trapped in column with their vulnerable rear armor exposed. The lead Sherman stopped, traversed its turret, and fired. The 76mm armor-piercing round punched through the lead tiger's rear plate at point-blank range. The penetration was catastrophic. Metal fragments ricocheting through the crew compartment, igniting fuel lines, setting ammunition on fire. Hoffman threw open the cupola hatch. "Rouse! Rouse!" His crew bailed out, tumbling onto the road as smoke poured from the stricken tank. The second Sherman lined up on Tiger number 2. Before it could fire, a white cloth appeared from the cupola. A tanker's undershirt tied to a cleaning rod. Surrender. The third Tiger followed suit. Then the fourth. Crews emerged with hands raised, faces blackened with smoke and oil, eyes hollow with the knowledge that they'd just lost 4 irreplaceable tanks without firing a shot. The German armored thrust, the spearhead meant to shatter the American line, collapsed in under 7 minutes. The battlefield transformed. What had been certain defeat became total Allied control. German infantry fled or surrendered. The Tigers sat dead or captured, monuments to failed momentum. Mallister stood at the hedgerow's edge, watching black smoke curl into the gray Norman sky. The wire lay somewhere beneath the lead Tiger's suspension, twisted and buried in steel. 1 coil of communications wire, 20 feet, 8 ounces. It had changed everything. The hedgerows fell quiet. Medics moved through the aftermath, tending wounded Germans and Americans alike. Captured Tiger crews sat under guard, still dazed, faces blank with disbelief. Equipment lay scattered, helmets, weapons, personal effects dropped in panic. Collins found Mallister sitting against a hedgerow, staring at nothing. "You crazy son of a bitch. You actually stopped them with wire." Others came by. Handshakes, backslaps. Rourke kept repeating, "I saw it, and I still don't believe it." Lieutenant Abrams was already writing his after-action report, pen scratching against damp paper. Mallister watched him simplify, condense, sanitize. The wire trap became enemy tank immobilized by field expedient. 4 Tigers destroyed or captured became hostile armor neutralized. The desperate gamble that saved 30 men became 3 lines in a document no one would read. Mallister felt strange. Pride, yes, exhaustion certainly, but also a hollow detachment, as if he'd watched it happen to someone else. Before they moved out, he walked to the lead Tiger. The wire was still there, twisted, embedded in the suspension, wound so tight around the road wheels that it had become part of the machine. He cut a section free with his knife. 6 inches of steel cable, bent and scarred, barely heavier than a pencil. At dusk, the platoon formed up and moved out. Behind them, 4 Tigers sat abandoned in the fading light. 57 tons each. Invincible yesterday. Carcasses of mythical beasts today. The bocage swallowed them into fog. James Mallister came home in November 1945. He returned to Pittsburgh, picked up his electrician's tools, and went back to work stringing power lines and wiring houses. When asked about the war, he'd say he was an engineer in France. Nothing more. No medals were ever issued. His name appeared in no official citations. The after-action report from that June morning was filed, archived, and forgotten. One document among millions, buried beneath Normandy, Market Garden, the Bulge, and 1,000 larger operations that shaped the narrative of victory. Decades passed. In 1989, a military historian researching Tiger tank losses in Normandy found a peculiar notation in division records. 4 Tiger is immobilized, destroyed by field expedient. Wire entanglement. Grid reference 49.3521 Digan 0.8947 DGW. The phrasing was unusual. Wire entanglement typically referred to defensive obstacles, not anti-tank measures. Curiosity led to deeper digging. Cross-referenced unit rosters, survivor interviews. Eventually, a name. Corporal James Mallister, combat engineer, 29th Infantry Division. By then, Mallister had been dead for 6 years. His obituary mentioned military service in one line. Battlefield ingenuity rarely makes headlines. The brilliant improvisations that save lives, turn impossible situations, and alter outcomes, disappear into paperwork and fading memories. History celebrates grand strategies and named battles, not a spool of wire and one man's desperate idea. Today, a 6-inch section of twisted steel cable sits in a small military museum in Pennsylvania. The placard reads, "Communications wire, Normandy, 1944. Unremarkable to the untrained eye. Capable of stopping a war machine once believed unstoppable. Sometimes the smallest idea changes everything." If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served.